My name is Elizabeth East. I'm a director here at LA Louver Gallery. Welcome to Leon Kossoff London Landscapes, the exhibition which is on 2 floors here in the gallery. We are the final leg of its international tour. It began in May of last year in London at Annelay Judo Fine Art and was seen in slightly different incarnations in Paris at Galerie Lelong and in New York at Mitchell, Innes and Nash. I think the show looks particularly stunning here in Los Angeles under our beautiful light. So I encourage you to all see the show. The focus of tonight, though, is actually going to be Leon Kossoff and the Old Masters. In 1936, Leon entered the doors of the National Gallery in London. He was age 10. Hello, Hunter. He was age 10, and at that moment, Leon Kossoff fell in love. He fell in love with the works of Nicolas Poussin, of Rubens, of Rembrandt, Veronese, and others. And the works of those great artists continued to influence his work throughout his life. Our engagement with Leon actually began in 1979, when Peter brought over Leon's work to include in this Knot of Life, and we have worked with him for the past 30 years. But going back to the subject in hand, I will be brief and say tonight we have 3 distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to introduce to my immediate right, John Walsh. John Walsh is... He perhaps actually needs no introduction. I feel everything I'm going to say is irrelevant. But from 1983 to the year 2000, Mr. Walsh was the director of the Getty Museum. Prior to that, he was a curator at the Metropolitan and also the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. He has taught art history at Harvard and at Columbia and continues to teach part-time at Yale. His specialty is 17th century Dutch painting, but I would say throughout my years of knowing you, John, you've been always interested in contemporary art, and in fact this led him to curate exhibitions by such artists as Ed Ruscha, Bill Viola, and the case in hand Leon Kossoff in the year 2000. So I'm delighted that John could be with us tonight and offer a very particular perspective on the subject. Second, I would like to introduce my colleague, Peter Goulds. Peter Goulds was born in London, like Leon. He studied art in Coventry and at the Manchester School of Art. He studied communication design, I should say. He was lured to these shores in 1972 to teach video at UCLA. And he had a long-standing desire, actually, to create a series of films of post-structuralism in 20th century art. But he set that desire aside to open LA Louver in 1976. And I guess I could say that the rest is history. In fact, our very extensive history is best served by looking at our website, lalouver.com, where we have many hundreds of exhibitions that we have done over the years, and other activities can be easily accessed or steered through the direction of Peter Goulds. As I mentioned previously, Peter first brought over Leon in 1979, and I'm delighted to say that he has over 30 years of a professional and personal friendship with Leon, so he will offer a very particular perspective tonight. And third, no means least, we have Hunter Drohojowska-Philp, who is an art critic and journalist, known to many of you, I'm sure, through her current broadcasts, weekly broadcasts on the NPR affiliate KCRW. She is also the representative, the West Coast representative of the Archives of American Art. She has written extensively on art. She's published books, including those on Julius Shulman, Georgia O'Keeffe, and most recently a book about Los Angeles art in the 60s called Rebels in Paradise. She has contributed many articles to art publications, including Art News, Art in America, Art Forum, and the Los Angeles Times. And it was in the Los Angeles Times in 2000 that a very rare interview that she did with Leon Kossoff was published. So very fortunate we have three very specific individuals tonight who all come to the subject with a different kind of viewpoint and a different kind of relationship to the artist. So without further ado, I cede the floor to Hunter, who is our moderator, and welcome you to Leon Kossoff and the Old Masters.
Well, I'll begin with Peter because, of course, he has the longest relationship with Leon Kossoff of anyone in this room, certainly. And I think we want to talk about how you discovered Leon, what you've seen evolve in his work, and specifically with his regard to the Old Masters.
Thank you. So the first exhibition of Leon's that we actually saw, when I say we, I mean Liz and I, my wife and I, was in 1978. We were going back to England, having secured our permanent residency here, and it so happened that that show was on. And it's a significant thing to mention because the number of shows that Leon makes are few and far between, the accumulation of work being such, the studio process being thus, that perhaps there's 5-6 years between shows. So when we left in 72, that was pretty much the last show that he had done, and we had already left the country before it was on. When we were students, we probably could have caught a show in 66 if we really were sharp enough at 17 to know what to do. So suffice to say, in 78, we did know what to do, and in fact, on the right-hand wall here in the far corner, when you get a chance later, is the first work of art that my wife and I ever acquired from that show. We could ill afford £800, but that's how we began. So, and we've kept it, of course, wouldn't dream of parting with that. So Leon, let's see if this works. Here's Leon. And his way of working, I won't get into laborious detail. You can read this evening is about a very specific topic, but London is his subject, and this show traverses all the districts that he has worked in over the years. The reference to the drawing that we acquired was in the location of Dalston, which was where the studio, really the first main studio was, outside the house. And his way of working is such, through these drawings, this show is principally about drawing. We've added paintings to give you a context, although this audience is quite well informed, unlike Paris, who wouldn't have perhaps seen any Kossoffs during the course of time. So his way of working is to go out with a drawing board, it hasn't changed, and work in situ. And what you see is pretty much executed there on the spot. It's the painting activity that returns to memory. So one could argue that in the process of drawing repetitively, I mean over and over, I mean hundreds and hundreds of drawings that get destroyed in the process of making, he's accumulating topographic knowledge so that in the painting exercise then he's perhaps bracing himself for a moment of hopeful verisimilitude where the paint surface you actually experience is perhaps arrived at in 3 hours. But the process to get there might have taken a year or two or longer or whatever it is, or come back to in time. So this is the studio on one of my visits. And drawing, as you can see, this is a painting studio, remember? Drawing, of course, plays a vital part in the process. So perhaps one could argue in the process thereof, is this really painting that's about drawing or drawing that's about painting, or maybe the two coalesce and they are the same? It's a hypothesis. But so this show is about his interest, as Elizabeth pointed out, from the age of 9. Somehow he found himself in the National Gallery. How he could ever do that when you think of his background and where he came from. Art was not encouraged in the house. He came from a district called Arnold's Circus, which is in Shoreditch. When you go upstairs to see the rest of the exhibition, you'll experience that environment of his youth. This was a rundown terribly dangerous part of town, apparently in the 19th century, early 19th century, and an area where the criminal class occupied. It's such that not even the policemen would go into this district. So there was a reformation that occurred without getting into London history, but suffice to say, the area was exorcised of this problem by people simply being moved out unilaterally, the area torn down, and rebuilt in a style that's familiar to some of you who go to Kensington. Cadogan Gardens, for example, has a particular style of architecture, and that is the style of the same architecture that Leon finds at Arnold Circus, except they built it with a school, with a synagogue, with a real neighborhood environment, and it's where the first bakery of Leon's grandfather's was actually situated. My youth is full of North London being about the competition between Grodzinski's bakery and Kosoff's bakery. This is a man who doesn't leave London, probably less than 10 times in his life. His generation is not unusual.
And one very significant occasion that we're going to talk about in a moment.
Yeah. And so in turn, this is not uncommon for that generation. My mother, for example, probably has not left London more than 20 times in her life. Anywhere. This is the Kosoff.
But he got himself to the National Gallery to see a Rembrandt somehow.
So here we are at the National Gallery, and at the age of 9, he built this into his habit, his way of working. And so he would go visit the old masters, in this case Rembrandt, and draw from it, and make etchings from it. And sometimes it would lead to him making very few, actually, in the end, and he would hate me to use this word, transcription paintings. They're actually paintings just from memory and from experience. So I'm going to rattle through a few other subjects that are of particular interest to him at the National Gallery's collection, which is what we're focused on for the moment, the Constable and the rendering from it. Remember, these plates are taken into the National Gallery, prepared, drawn into, in situ, the way the drawings are made in the landscape, and then taken to the printer immediately, like in a taxi, straight there, and then bitten. The wiping, of course, is very important, the kind of hand that holds, that pulls the ink. This is a fabulous subject. This is a very, very important subject to his ongoing work and ideas and sense of self. Rubens, of course, figuring large. And the way he's been able to, in senior years, have access to the National Gallery is because in the wisdom of the English government, remember these are national collections, they actually give certain distinguished artists, not necessarily by years, the privilege of entering the museum after hours. So they can go in at midnight, 2 in the morning, or in Leon's case, take the first tube at 5:15 and be right there to get in at 6. So when you go in with him to one of these exhibitions, or rather one of these private viewings, the guards say, "Hello, Leon." He shuffles in, dips his head, and kind of pretends they didn't say anything. But Poussin became a major thrust for his work and of interest, and this is where we come to the project we're talking about here, and this is the Triumph of Pan, and how this was transcribed into drawing and into prints. This, without getting into technical detail, is printed by a man called Mark Balachian, who is also the printer for Freud, also the printer for Auerbach. And Leon, in the end, decided, marvelous as this man is, to not continue with him necessarily, because his hand was wiping the plates in the same way as perhaps he wiped it for Auerbach or wiped it for Freud. So he wanted to have some distinction. So some of the mark making, this in turn was transcribed. So this culminated in a marvelous exhibition at the National Gallery of his interest in their collection. And so this was assembled by Colin Wiggins, and this is an example of a few of the installation shots, which leads to this particular moment I want to refer to, because with the accumulated interest in art that's happened in the last, fortunately for us who are involved in this subject, 40 years. It happens to traverse my professional life. There's been a huge accumulated interest in the subject, so much so that traveling exhibitions have been assembled of a very elaborate kind that could never really be done before. And they've come often to London. In this case, Poussin was assembled and brought to the Royal Academy. And Leon has one of those passes to go there. So he went obsessively to the Royal Academy to capture these pictures as if they would never have a chance to do it again. So that led to this particular picture coming and actually being acquired by Jacob Rothschild and Lady Berlin, and was actually given to the Israel Museum. And Leon's transcriptions actually went with it. The National Gallery has a room dedicated to Poussin, naturally, and this segues into very much what we're going to talk about today. And this is the program that came from London to here. It came to the LA County Museum, and it traveled from here to Australia, to the National Gallery in Canberra, where they very smartly, Jane Kinsman was the curator, she assembled some additional work from, actually it turned out, virtually every museum in Australia owned his work, and so they added that to the show. And this is what the County Museum show was installed to look like. Very big show. It was during Graham Beale's time, and Victor put it together, and here we are with John.
Well, because it's a very significant moment to move our conversation to John, because Peter happened to call John and say, this I think has to go to you, please come look at my etchings. Oh, you took them to him. He took the etchings to John Walsh, and then he, as he's just done for you, he did a little educational process, as it were, introducing John to the work of Kosoff. Is that not correct?
Yeah, it's true. Can you hear me back there? Am I clear? I mutter, yeah? And I have to turn the clock back to 1998 now. That was not long after the new Getty Museum opened. Peter and I had a conversation, which he asked me, I thought fairly bluntly for Peter, did you know that Leon Kossoff has been making drawings after Poussin paintings? And I blushed deeply and said, no, but I would love to know about that, said I, and he showed me some of the products. Because Kossoff, as Peter just said, has been at the great exhibition in 1995 at the Royal Academy, and in fact had been hugely busy there, unbeknownst to me and to most people. I was floored by what I saw, partly because I couldn't imagine a painter more remote from Poussin, that is a contemporary figurative painter. Couldn't imagine anybody farther than Kosoff. I mean, Poussin, this is, Poussin, after all, in my mind anyway, and in the minds of many artists, was at one extreme, often compared with Rubens as the most learned and even cerebral painter, the painter of discipline and balance, even when figures are in action, as they were here. A kind of model of restraint, classical restraint. And Kossoff's drawing was furious, it seemed to me, and impulsive, scribbly in a way that I couldn't, with my limited imagination at that point, couldn't quite imagine. I couldn't see the connection. I couldn't see the utility to Poussin, to Kossoff. And so this is an intriguing proposition. I love artists that make me suspicious and propositions that sound possibly dubious. But I did know something about Kosoff. It didn't just comport with what I was being shown, though. I'd known that Kosoff, for example, as a young artist, or an artist actually in the studio of David Baumfield, was a kind of moody and romantic almost painter. This self-portrait at the age of 26, as an art student, as I had a kind of hypnotic character, but I had only seen it at the Tate. I knew his figure paintings, mainly family members, a small repertory of models during the 1980s, paintings that seemed to me eccentric in interesting ways, purposely crude-looking, flat, distorted, painted with thick, sticky paint in strange layers with kind of flicks and strings like gum or pasta on the surface. Anyway, it was a peculiar kind of expressionism, and expressionism clicked for me because I knew he must have come from the kind of Middle European tradition of expressionistic painting, like in fact, Kokoschka. I'm showing you the marvelous portrait of his friend, the painter Karl Moll, of 1913. But it was kind of Kokoschka with a kind of abstract expressionist or post-abstract expressionist surface. Like his friend, in fact, like his friend Frank Auerbach, whose name you've heard from Peter, who was also with him, Kossoff, as a student. This is Auerbach's amazing portrait, also in the Tate. Most of what I know about English art comes from the Tate, I'm embarrassed to say. That which I hadn't learned here at LA Louver. Anyway, this is Auerbach's wonderful portrait of the poet Rimbaud of the mid-70s. There was work that I knew and loved, like this huge painting of a swimming pool, the swimming pool that he used to take his child to in the early 70s. And this work just captivated me because it was just swarming with life. And in fact, it kind of embraced city life. This isn't kids at the beach, this is kids in an artificially built swimming pool open to everybody. There was a kind of element of common humanity here that seemed to be essential to city life. It was full of energy, characters were in motion, and all of this treated with a total unsentimentality. So, you know, I could have supposed that there was a good draftsman behind all this, but I didn't know that. I didn't really know those drawings, or any drawings by this artist at all. Anyway, at the Getty, we had decided during the 90s that we would not collect contemporary art, except for a few areas. That was being done wonderfully well by other museums here in Los Angeles. We had decided instead to, well, collect contemporary photographs, to collect artists' books, to commission works of art from time to time, sometimes large for the Getty Center, sometimes small for special exhibitions that we had, and also to try to make a program of exhibitions that included comparisons and connections between older art and contemporary art. That seemed to be a niche that we could fill. And the more I thought about Kossoff and looked into it, with Peter's help, I must say, the more attractive Kossoff seemed and the more logical in this way of thinking. There was, about Kossoff's drawings here after Poussin, a kind of total engagement. I didn't really understand it. I didn't think the audience would understand it either right away. But it was completely palpable from these drawings, which are so full of juice and so full of voltage. This is the great painting another of those after-hours paintings from the National Gallery of Cephalus and Procris. And Cephalus and Procris is quite a story, after all. Cephalus, the handsome boy who's Aurora, the goddess of dawn, falls in love with and tries to detain after a night of pleasure. There's Procris. I said Cephalus and Procris, but I'll get to her. Aurora, the goddess of dawn, is hanging on to her lover Cephalus, who's trying to escape, egged on by the Puto in the middle, standing up, holding her a portrait of Procris, his real girlfriend, and begging on his fidelity to her. Anyway, the picture is an idea about fidelity, beautifully expressed in a kind of fluent body language, Kosoff got it. He understood exactly what the core of the picture was, which was this combination of resistance, dedication on the part of Aurora, interference on the part of a few people, and then the whole thing just charged with these scribbles, which I couldn't make sense of, and wasn't really, in fact, as it turns out, meant to. He even made a big painting after this subject, in his own amazing language, this kind of clotted application of paint pushed around with the brush more than laid on by the brush, and then scribbled on again in a way that he drew, scribbled on with white paint. Peter, by way of bait, I think, showed me the big surprise here, a drawing that Kosoff had made a couple of years earlier of the most difficult and weird of all the Poussin paintings, particularly the landscapes, the so-called landscape with a man killed by a snake. No one has ever found another subject for it, so that's what it's called. And there is Kosoff tangling with the most enigmatic and strange of all Poussin works. Here it is on the right in the National Gallery, where he hung out and tried to master it in a series of drawings, but too short. I said at the National Gallery, but I meant at the exhibition of the Royal Academy, where he was permitted to stay, but not late enough for him to manage to do all the landscapes. And he said, and you told me, I think after the show closed, he was really sorry that he didn't get to the landscapes. And he said to somebody else, I think to Richard Kendall after the show, I wish I had drawn more from the landscapes. I wish I had been able to make more prints of them. They haunt me. Well, Peter remembered, and Peter knew that the Getty had just bought the great landscape from Sudeley Castle, and hung it at the Getty. And he also told me that the County Museum is planning to do an exhibition of Poussin paintings and drawings from paintings at the National Gallery. So he saw the pattern before I did. Luckily, it seemed to me so completely logical. I said, thinking about his work with the landscape with the man killed by a snake, that it would be marvelous if we could get him to come to Los Angeles. Here's the painting. He can have access 24 hours a day to the painting. And Peter said gently to me, Leon doesn't travel. Right, I said, well, paintings travel. Why don't we put the painting at the National Gallery in London, nearby to the landscape that he loves, the landscape with a man killed by a snake, and he can work as long as he wants on both of them. I had not really thought that I had entered in contemporary art zone here, where you think nothing of committing to an exhibition and publicizing it before having the slightest idea what's going to be in it. You commit to the artist, and then it's a crapshoot. So this happened. We did send it. You and the National Gallery friends arranged for Leon to go to the gallery whenever he pleased. And he, confronted with the Getty picture, which was, I think, not so much new to him as new to his idea of what he might do. He, I think, in some way, sort of choked. And we might have suspected that. I said at some point, after some days of the National Gallery having our picture, to Peter, how's Leon doing, do you think? Peter knew from day to day how Leon was doing. He had Leon under surveillance, I think, if I could put that gently. And Leon is said to have said, I didn't hear him say it myself, about this painting, it's awfully peaceful. He took refuge, actually, In this painting, his old friend, the landscape with the snake, which he was still trying to master, and so he did a series of marvelous colored drawings after the landscape with a man killed with a snake. Here you can see the basic placement is the same. The man being killed by the snake is at the lower left. The man showing shock is at the far right. In the middle, a woman who kind of mediates this, all put into this calm and beautiful and balanced landscape, as though to say something undoubtedly welcome to Kossoff's ears, that even the most beautiful and controlled of environments can turn to disaster. You can never be totally sure of anything, least of all your own safety. Anyway, he returned, though, to our picture after having worked for a while at the National Gallery painting, The Man with the Snake, returned using charcoal to try to get at that peacefulness of the Getty picture. His scribbling technique, of course, was not exactly made for calm and serenity, let alone reflections in the water, let alone shifting cloud formations. So Kossoff had to work with himself and to some extent, I think, against himself to try to get it right. He did let go, though, in some wonderful way. And the results are quite amazing. He began to use colored chalk again, this time blue for the water and the sky, and things came under a greater degree of control. But things changed again when he began to make prints on zinc plates, because there it was natural that tonal areas, rather than scribbled lines, took over, and he could render the landscape, re-render it, I would say, in a kind of ethereal, floating planes, very different from those wrenching zigzags that you saw in the man being killed by a snake. And here are two etchings, one that he was familiar with at the right, and the one at the left from the Getty painting, which shows something kind of marvelous. Not only slightly different colors of ink, but printmaking techniques distance the artist a little more from the motif, make it more his own, I think. The Getty exhibition, I'm glad to say, had both paintings, both landscape paintings by Poussin in it, and the best, I think, of this huge production of drawings, colored drawings, and etchings with very subtle variations in the printing of ink in various colors. It was a thrilling experience, I've got to say. We threw in, with help, we threw in some Kossoff paintings just to show the main line of his work more clearly. Leon came over, he's not a traveler, but somehow he managed to come over out of some kind of, his curiosity conquered his fear briefly. How many nights did he spend? 2 nights, 3 nights, says Peter.
Days, yeah.
2 nights, 3 days. Because Leon Kossoff is not only an adventurer, not only an explorer, but he's absolutely a creature, as Peter said, of London. This is the most wonderful portrait I know of Kossoff. This is Kossoff in his own backyard. Notice what the view at the backyard is. It's a train. There are train tracks right behind his backyard. And notice what surrounds him. Shrubs, empty of leaves. There's scribbles. He's locked into his own environment and locked in by kind of drawings. Anyway. And looking none too happy about it, but capable of we like to think a kind of euphoria and satisfaction when he's conquered problems, which he never really thinks he has. And how he applies this way of thinking to the marvelous pictures you see in the room is another subject. Isn't it, Hunter?
Marvelous. Well, in fact, Leon Kossoff did the first interview he'd done in 45 years with me when you had that show at the Getty. And he wasn't happy about it, I can tell you. I kept saying things like, I don't know what you want to talk about. But what he said that was so interesting, what you said the other day that was so interesting, is that artist who knows where the gas tank is, and he goes there to fill up. And I think that's a great way to put the relationship between Kosoff and the way he uses drawing. He actually talked about the fact that he's driven by the fact that he believes he cannot draw. And of course, when you initially look at Kossoff's drawings, as you kind of indicated, John, you wonder if you can draw. You know, they look a bit hashed about, look all bit scribbly and clumsy and sort of ham-handed. And it takes a while to sort of fall in love with his ugly beauty. And he said at that interview that my obsession is I can't draw. As a result, my drawing has developed. If you think you can draw, maybe your drawing doesn't develop. So a kind of interesting humility there. But when he goes to the old masters, what's interesting to me is that he spends so little time really trying to make them emulate the paintings he's looking at, which are as though he's consciously moving away from that sort of refinement. Would you like to comment on that? And then Peter would also probably like to have a comment on that.
Yeah, can I let William Blake comment on that? William Blake said, the difference between a good artist and a bad artist is this, that a bad artist looks like he copies a great deal. The good artist does copy a great deal.
It's very good.
I mean, is always learning, is always impatient, has never mastered a problem. It just
Well, I think in
opens up
fact
new problems.
they are copiers. He is copying from the old masters, making no attempt to obviously create any exact rendering of the subject per se, but to somehow absorb its essence, absorb its being, and then it comes forth in his own work.
Well, he also said that we see drawings as an alternative to photography, but drawing grew up as a means of expressing one's individual relationship to the outside world. And I think that is extraordinarily true for Kossoff. And on that note, we might want to go to Peter and say, so here he is, spending his time in the museum, copying the old masters at 6 in the morning or 6:30 in the morning, and again, in this parallel track, so he's copying this world of refinement and grace and what we conventionally associate with beauty. And then his alternative subject matter is, as Peter said, his neighborhood, which you're surrounded by here, you see. And this is not necessarily something of elevation and grace. This is something of people scrabbling around in the streets. This is the entrance to the metro. There is one recurrent theme for him in the Christ Church. This is, I think, a rather extraordinary building, this Nicholas Hawksmoor Church in Shoreditch, Spitalfields, where it's a neighborhood he's extremely familiar with from his childhood. But that interests me, the balance between these two parallel, seemingly almost oppositional worlds.
Well, it's routine set in from early childhood, and it's routine set in for the need to accumulate information and to work. So in addition to these particular subjects, rightfully, Christchurch being a feature of his childhood, this was somewhere for Orthodox Jewish people, it's verboten, and so therefore he took 70 years to have the strength of courage to go back and tackle this subject. And when he did, the first one started to emerge, I think it was about 87. I believe, off the top of my head, there were about 11 finished paintings from this subject.
Of the Christ Church.
Of this subject.
Okay.
The last one being, in fact, the one we have in the South Gallery here, which you'll see. And sometimes when you look through catalogues, and certainly if you look on our website, you can see all of this material documented. You'll see sometimes and there's a drawing in the South Gallery, which is owned by an Australian friend of mine. And you'll see there's a kind of parallaxing that occurs where the building is seemingly distorted, twisted in shape. It's a child's perspective, of course, from memory that he's retained. But he's drawing it as an older person. So these subjects then are the obsession of the day. They're not just landscape, they're not just old masters. They are indeed his wife, his close friends, who come and sit, or the model. Fidelma, for example, lives in Ireland, in Dublin, and she would fly over for long weekends. And the routine was such, it's no longer, he's 87 now. If he gets 3 hours in the studio, it's a good day. But his normal routines, and really until the last 5 years, was to start work at 6 and finish at 6. It was good for our relationship, because the time zone being 8 hours, it meant that when he was finished, I was starting. Sometimes that led to some long-term problems. When we began to represent him exclusively, which was not our design, but was what we were blessed with, in '94, I think from that day until very recently, maybe 3 years ago, where finally we created a comfort zone in London that was adequate, there was not a day, as my wife will contest, in my life that I didn't speak to him, anywhere in the world. So these obsessions, these needs, now the last 3 or 4 years, we've got a system in place now that has afforded him other kinds of comfort. But these routines of drawing, these routines of constantly revisiting subjects. For example, there's a marvelous painting, again, when you look through catalogs, you'll see, there's only 3 times he's written on a painting. Why would they write at all? But anyway, 1965-66, he finishes a painting of Peggy. It's called Nude on a Red Bed. It's quite a famous painting, and you can see it in lots of catalogs, it's in lots of shows. And when he finishes it, almost sort of out of final resolution, I got this thing done, he writes Leon Kossoff on it, in large letters, quite large. Just right across, you think he'd be scouring the surface, emblazing the surface, And then on another occasion, his closest, one of his many friends, but closest friends, always artists, of course, was Ewan Uglow. Ewan Uglow became the head of the Slade. He would have studied under Coldstream, William Coldstream, who was in fact a student at the same time as my mother-in-law at the Slade. So these are long lineages, Coldstream being the left half of the British brain's hemisphere of drawing, the academic drawing of measuring and pointing and marking and connecting marks, and the other side of the brain being the brain that John referred to, which Auerbach and Kosoff followed, and that's the Bomberg side of the brain, which is Central European, gestural, emotional. These are the 2 aspects of English art education. So this would be what Kosoff would be responding to in Ewan, who was this highly disciplined, measured painter. And when Ewan was struggling in life and dying, he was painting his model Kathy at the time, long-serving model. In fact, this was the last painting he made of her. She actually straightened her nose, and he could never draw her again. She went for plastic surgery, and she could never render her again. But to cut a long story short, he's painting this work, and it's from, and Kathy's there, and he finishes it as he's going to the memorial of Ewan Uglow, and he writes Ewan. And finally, upstairs on Arnold Circus, this is not an innocent group of drawings. This is an unbelievable group of drawings, because think about your childhood, the one I introduced at the beginning, where the bakery is and where the shul is and where all these things that are there, that are safe havens. He's finally, at the age of, what is he now? He's 87, so he was 85 when he finally was able to go back to that place and draw that place, draw his childhood again. So he renders it in this beautiful summer, and the following summer of 2012 was an equally glorious summer, so he was able to go back again. Now you think about the drawing boards on the tube, he was able to leave the drawing boards in a neighborhood school, a school sponsored by Prince Charles, actually, where drawing is kept alive in London. It's relegated out of virtually all art school systems now, by the way, including here. The only school that teaches drawing here, by the way, is Otis College of Art, which is why I support it. But along with that, nonetheless, he was able to go back there, make these drawings, and the last drawing is upstairs, and it's written on it, "Summer Afternoon." So to answer your question, it's really a process of him being able to get back into the studio, to be comfortable each day, to work. And that's really been, in a certain sense, my responsibility as a dealer, is to help facilitate his ability to go back to the studio, to continue. And even though it's 3 hours a day, it's still my duty today.
Well, one thing I wanted to say before we open up to questions is that when Kosoff was confronted with the idea of making these drawings from this extremely calm landscape provided so kindly by the Getty Museum, he was a little bit freaked out, because he was not feeling it. He was feeling much more passionate, as John said, about the Poussin paintings that have more of an implied violence and more of a turbulence. And what he said was, all I can say is that the greater the anxiety to make something happen, the more likely it is going to happen. But I thought, so he did get his drawings done of the landscape with calm. But what I thought about that was so interesting when I reread that comment was, to me it seems as though his drawings are uniformly produced behind anxiety. That they were like that the obsessive, what we talked about, that obsessive mark making it as though his comfort comes from that movement.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because again, on one of these few trips outside London, to come to John's show was 2 nights, 3 days. To come to our show twice here was 2 nights, 3 days. He went to New York once. He went to the Prada with his son overnight. And on one occasion, when we were making an exhibition in Copenhagen, he was there. He took me to the Rijksmuseum. This is in relation to your observation. And he said, I want to show you something. So we rushed through, just as when we went to Arnold's Circus for the first time. I couldn't believe that experience, and he rushed me through it. So I wanted to stop along the way at the Vermeers, and no, come on, no, this is wrong, no, keep going. So finally we get to this painting of Rembrandt's The Marriage of Titus. That's his son. And I'm looking at it, and of course it's a phenomenal painting. And then this little voice comes over my shoulder, and it says, beauty lies on the other side of anxiety. Because I'd never forget that. So, anyway.
Well, that's a wonderful place to pause.
Maybe we should watch the trailer next.
Yes, we do have a little trailer that they want to show you, and we can do that. And after the trailer, we'll have some questions.
The point of this trailer is, I'll just introduce it briefly, if I may.
Not very long, but it's very good.
This is a 5-minute trailer for the film we're going to show next week, which is a full-on documentary made by Ben Fox. Ben Fox turns out is the nephew, one of the nephews of Leon, but more importantly, in this context, he is the chap who did that Gettysburg series that got such immediate attention. So he's a very fine filmmaker. The reason we were so discreet, by the way, on our announcement in mentioning, we couldn't mention his name, we couldn't mention the nature of the film, because entre nous, it's being negotiated right now with the BBC that the trailer is a prelude to, you all must come back for this film, by the way. It's just a sensational film. It's 35 minutes long. It's very insightful. And if any of you do come and you have an interest to see a documentary on Arnold's Circus, we'll have it here in case you want to see it as well. That's a very good BBC film. But the BBC are making a documentary, and they're going to use Ben to do it, and this will be the seed material for that. I think they're going to go more extensively into London and film some of the locations, so to speak, that you see here. So this is the prelude to this trailer.
I'm astonished. I never anticipated it. We weren't long in planning. Someone had an idea, and then the exhibition grew. just enough works were selected, and I'm still bowled over by it.
Leon Kossoff is the preeminent painter in Britain today, and he comes from a period, really, when painting was being examined after the post-war period. And Kosoff, Bacon, Lucian Freud, Frank Auerbach, uniquely in Britain, belonged to a generation that believed in the great continuation of Western painting and tradition, and its renewal and its survival. So, in answer to the question is, who is Leon Kossoff? I would say he's one of the greatest painters working anywhere in the world today.
Made my studio downstairs, and it's still there. Everything seemed to change. Paintings changed. I went to the swimming pools and drew and painted those. And yet, it was all about space and movement and light. And every time you look, you see something different. You experience something different. This is where my relationship to my work, that I feel different from a lot of people. I actually experience things different. I once said that every time the model comes, every time someone comes to sit, everything is different. They're different, the light is different, you know, and I can't just... in the end, all the differences amount to a sort of presence. For me, it's a process of going on drawing. Just going on drawing until something happens, and then you realise that you can start painting.
Are there many subjects that you've started drawing then and have actually not?
Oh yes, there are subjects, yes. Yeah, there are lots of subjects, lots of people, there are lots of everything. But not being able to do it is part of the being able to do it.
But the drawing means that you know something so well in the end, because you paint very, very quickly, don't you?
Very quickly, yeah. The paintings only take a couple of hours. Whatever you
It's
see.
astonishing to look at these and believe.
Yeah, well, I was young and strong and desperate. In the process of painting, the marks of people passing me in the crowd or at the station actually become people I know or people that are sitting for me. And not all the time, but many times. Those figures, like the woman leaning on the Times thing, is Peggy, it's my wife. And that's my father coming to sit for me. And that's Fidelma, also coming to sit for me. Oh, it's a long time ago now. How many years, I don't know. I can't help it. The visual seeing things turns me on. That's the only thing I can say. Ask my wife. I go out into the street in the morning and suddenly my mood has changed completely. Because I see, you know, I don't know, just a few trees. Yeah.